And here it is.
Good evening, gentlemen. Hope you can hear me.
Howard Bank. And
I just heard somebody. Sounds good. Promising.
here it is. Hmm. That's you hear it?
Like I can hear somebody.
He hears you.
I hope you can hear me.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're very clear. Is that Jeremy? Or
Mr. Seeley, I'm a huge fan of your work. I've probably watched all of your seminars that are on YouTube. I've got one of your books in my cart to be checked out soon. I follow a lot of your work. It's a pleasure.
well, my pleasure. I hope it'll be fun for you to hear the presentation presented in person and instead of by reading pages in a book this evening.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, looks like the system is working well. Should I go full screen at this point or share my I can do this and shrink this. Is this part of a live meeting or people signing in to hear this talk via Zoom?
It should be both, from what I understand.
You see. Okay.
Mr. Seeley, are most of your personal hives still local bees from the Arnott Forest?
Yeah, they are local bees. The Arnold course is about 20 miles away. So I put up my bait hives a little closer to home. There's lots of woods around wild beasts. Yeah, I like to get free bees in bait hives.
Very nice.
Some of them are some have good mite resistance and some don't have good mite resistance, but they tell me which are which because I don't treat them and we see what happens.
That was a part of your Darwinian beekeeping approach, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And there's um, a number of beekeepers around here. It really depends upon having good access to wild colonies. I think if you're a beekeeper where there's a lot of queens produced commercially and the beekeepers have those in their hives, I think it's a little harder to be a Darwinian, take the Darwinian approach. Though there are some things that really still help if you want to avoid treatment, like keeping colonies in small hives so they're apt to swarm. That makes a huge difference. It really blunts the varroa's reproduction. Sounds like a happy crew. That's good.
Dr. Seeley, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Not sure who I'm hearing, but I'm hearing people.
Jeannie, nice to see you.
Okay, hi Jeannie.
Just a moment and we'll have everything ready. We just got everything set up.
Great. Okay, that's good. I know can be tricky. In fact, it's
You want to record it? Hey, Silly, I think you have to give us permission to record.
you have my permission.
Well, I think you're gonna do it. It should be, if you click on participants and then you go to HECIT, it should be able to let us record it.
Okay. Participants. Okay.
Yeah. And HECIT, does it say anything about recording, allowing us to record?
No, I'm not seeing that.
Maybe the three dots.
Oh, yeah, I think I did see a 3-dot thing. Where was that?
What happens if it's your camera on?
Right, camera on.
If he does it.
Oh, share sound. not really seeing what I have to do to make it so you can be recorded. Right.
Actually, I guess it is recording already.
Okay.
I guess,
It is recording up in the corner.
yeah.
We're good.
Okay. All right, well, I'll let you guys.
Thank you so much.
Y'all need to show you how to mute it.
For us,
Some people were saying, yeah, that there was a lot of background noise. It'd just be this button right here, below. Right there. Just-
I'm trying to figure out how to remove this stuff at the top now.
Do you remember how to turn the microphone on and stuff? Okay. All right, I'll leave you guys. If you have any trouble, just call.
thank you.
Just wanted to welcome everybody back tonight. Awesome, okay. And wanted to take a few minutes to talk about our guest speaker tonight before we get started. The topic is going to be how a honeybee swarm chooses its home. And our guest speaker tonight is Dr. Thomas Dyer Seeley. Wanted to tell you just a little bit of background information about Dr. Seeley. He grew up in Ellis Hollow, New York, which neighbors Ithaca and Cornell University. He attended primary and secondary schools in Ithaca. During this time, he became a beekeeper. He began studying bees, and he worked summers at the Dice Lab for honeybee studies at Cornell. He then went on to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, receiving a degree in chemistry, summa cum laude. He attended Harvard University, receiving a PhD in biology. And while at Harvard, his advisors were two very famous and well-known biologists, Bert Goodler and Edward Wilson, who were very involved in studying the social behavior of ants. After 6 years of teaching at Yale University, Dr. Seeley returned home to Ithaca and to Cornell, where he has been the Horace White Professor in Biology at Cornell and served as chair in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior. He's also a field biologist who's done extensive research in the behavior and social life of honeybees. One interesting fact is that Dr. Seeley has a species of bee named for him, Neocorinurella seelii. The bee lives in the high mountains of Colombia and Venezuela. Currently, he is the Horace White Professor Emeritus at Cornell and conducts research. He is 6 books and over 175 scientific articles. His latest book, Piping Hot Bees and Boisterous Buzz Runners, will be available in April of this year. It is 20 Mysteries of Honeybee Behavior Solved. Dr. Seeley said he would answer questions at the end of the presentation if anyone should have them. And if those viewing remotely would please mute your microphones so that it doesn't interfere with Dr. Seeley's presentation. Thank you, Dr. Seeley, for being with us. And I'll turn this over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction and that generous description. And I also want to thank you folks for a box of cool things that arrived at my house in early December and included some big jars of creamed honey, but also the most beautiful little bee hunters box I've ever seen. It was made right there in Abingdon. It's so good. Such a craftsman made that. So way beyond the ones that I've built for myself. So I'm very, very grateful. That's a beautiful little bee box. I don't know if you folks have gone bee hunting, but you need a bee box and you got a place to get one right there in Abingdon. Well, tonight I'm going to share a story with you that's very near and dear to my heart, and I think you will find it utterly fascinating. As you can see, the title is How a Honeybee Swarm Chooses Its Home.
You want me to put
Yeah.
some crunchies on yours?
When I make it, put the read.
Getting a little,
So it is.
we need,
Okay.
there we go. So let's review the basic biology of a honeybee swarm. You probably all know that it's a reproductive propagule of a honeybee colony that's grown strong and can afford to divide itself into two. The swarm contains one queen bee. If it's the prime swarm, it's the mother queen that's left. On average, at least in the Ithaca area, the average number of worker bees in a swarm is 12,000. They can get larger than that and smaller than that, but that's the average. And as you can see, the swarm's hanging out here in the open, and it's clear that it needs to find a protective home. It's a matter of life or death for these bees.
Dr.
Yeah.
Seeley, I could just ask Janice if you could please mute yourself.
You want to turn off TV?
No, because I just want to be on this while we're,
That's okay.
and then when we're finished
can-
eating, I'm going to listen to the rest of the lecture.
I can turn it down at my end so it doesn't
You
pick up.
can't really
Well,
speaker.
Janice
listen
needs
to
to
it.
for us little
Listen to
teeny-
it while you're eating.
Is that better?
Dr. Seeley, can you mute the participants?
He can under his buttons. He's the lead.
So I'll proceed. Hope that works. You're in. Now, I'm going to talk mostly about the work that I've done studying swarms of bees and how they find a home, but I'm building on the work of a gentleman named Martin Lindauer. He's shown here. He's standing with a team of students and Professor Carl von Frisch here with a lovely lederhosen, leather pants for characteristic of Bavaria. Both of them have that. Martin Lindauer, he was in 1949, he made a pioneering discovery about swarm bees. It is that bees will use their waggle dance to report potential home sites. Up to this point, people thought the bees just used the waggle dance to advertise rich food sources. Since then, we've learned they use it also to advertise water sources and resin sources for making propolis. But the striking thing is Lindauer found they use it when a swarm colony is swarmed and the swarm bees need to find a new home. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And the way he made this discovery is he came out of the laboratory building in Munich one day, and they had hives of bees at the Zoological Institute there, and one of them swarmed, and one of the swarms came out and settled near the gate to the entry to the institute. And Lindauer was a very good observer, so he paused and looked at the bees, and he saw them doing dances, and at first waggle dances. And at first he thought that, oh, okay, he thought, well, yeah, I guess these bees are still foraging, even though they're in a swarm. But as I say, he was a very good observer. And what he noticed is that when a bee would land and start dancing, she didn't unload any nectar. And he thought, that's interesting. This doesn't look like a bee that's been foraging. And none of the bees were carrying pollen either. So he thought, I wonder if these bees are advertising future home sites, because he knew that the bees had to get a new home. So, but his observations were cut short because the institute's beekeeper came up and said, "We need that swarm," and took it away. But he got permission a few years later to set up swarms and watch them closely, watch their dancing. And what I want to share with you now is one of the records that he made when he watched over 5 days in June 1951, the dances of the bees on that swarm. Now, he had only the simplest of tools, as I'm showing here. He told me he had a chair, he had a notebook, he had some pencils, he got some shellac paints, and that was tricky. I won't go into but that involved going to a rather risky black market in Munich, some small brushes and a wristwatch. And because his tools were so simple, and this was still just a few years after the end of World War II and the German economy was rebuilding. So he was not able to keep track of individual bees. What he would do is he would see a bee on the side of one of his swarms doing a waggle dance, and he would quickly note down the information he needed to know to figure out the direction and the distance of the target the bee was advertising. He presumed it was a nest site because he didn't see bees coming back unloading food. And then he'd put a dot of paint on that, and then he would ignore that bee thereafter. Then he'd look for the next bee dancing, and so forth. And so let's walk through this diagram that he made, which is really very clever, I think. So on the 26th of June, from 1:35 to 3 o'clock, he saw on this first day after the swarm came out, just two bees dancing. One was dancing for a site to the north, and here's a scale bar here in kilometers. That's 6/10 of a mile. So it was about half a mile away. Another one did a dance for a site in the southeast. Not much activity was going on that first day. The next day, more things happened. The weather was again good in the afternoon, and now we saw bees dancing again for that site to the north, but also a site to the northeast, the east, south, southeast, south, and southwest, so forth. So a lot of different sites had been found by scout bees. And then the next day, again, it wasn't good weather, so just two sites were advertised. Wasn't much dancing. The 29th of June, though, was very good weather. And now the scout bees were very active, and you can see they advertised a lot of different sites. But again, there was no consensus. They were really just putting lots of possibilities on the table. And that was that was in the morning. And then in the afternoon, something started to happen. This site to the southeast, as you can see, was starting to become more popular than any of the other sites. 15 bees danced for that site, whereas all the other sites got just one or two. And then that persisted and got even stronger as the afternoon went on. Then the next day, there were 60, almost everybody, by the end of the afternoon on this day, the 29th of June, almost every dance he saw, new dancer he saw was dancing for that site to the southeast. And the next morning, same thing. They picked up where they left off. Almost every new bee that danced for that southeast site. And at 9:40, the swarm lifted off and flew off to the east-southeast. So this was really he realized that this was an amazing phenomenon because it was an example of collective decision making. Scouts had gone out, found lots of different possibilities, but had narrowed it down to one site and then moved to that site. Now he couldn't follow the bees to their new sites. He explained to me why he couldn't. The city was still piles of rubble. And so when these swarms would fly away, he would try to run over the piles of rubble and to follow them to new sites. In a few cases, he was successful, but usually not. So here's his key findings. I'll just summarize them here. Initially, he saw that bees perform dances for multiple sites, home sites. Then, before a swarm flew off to its new home, all the dances were indicating one site. And then he saw that the swarm flew off to the dance consensus site and moved in. There were a few swarms. He followed over 20 swarms, and there were a few of them that he was able to follow all the way. And I don't know how he did it, because wherever you see these hatched lines in this map of the part of Munich near the train station, and here's the Zoological Institute here, that was rubble. And what he told me he did is that he would run under the swarm, and if he could run over the piles of rubble and keep in touch with it, he could follow it. So the first swarm he followed moved into a building here. But Carl von Frisch had a dentist down here, and the dentist told him that his wife noticed bees flying into the bank here, and they had color paint marks on them. So Lindauer went down there and found, yep, that's where his swarm had moved on that swarm. So swarm flew to the dance consensus site and moved in. And what this told him is that dances on swarms indicate possible home sites. Nobody knew that the bees would use their waggle dance to advertise home sites until Lindauer discovered that. And so he wrote this up, and it's big, this very long scientific paper called, it's in German, but the title means Swarm Bees Out House Hunting, which I think is a very charming title. And he, as I say, he documented that very clearly bees, swarm bees, have a process of group decision making, but exactly how it worked was a mystery that I studied from about 10 years, from 1997 to 2007. It was a lot of work, as you'll see. Well, the starting point of my investigation was to really pick up where Lindauer had left off and just observe the bees. But what I was able to do, what Lindauer had not been able to do, is first of all make swarms where every bee was labeled in the swarm with a colored dot of paint on the abdomen and one of the queen tags, one of the 500 different color and number combinations of queen tags glued to the thorax. So I could make swarms of 4,000 bees, every bee individually identifiable. And then I could video record their dancing. So I could, and the way I would do that is I could mount the swarm on this swarm mount where it was a little tricky. I had to have this screen placed right over the outer surface of the swarm. And what that meant is the bees would then dance on the screen, and then you could get very good video recordings of the dances because they weren't dancing on an irregular surface, and they were all on this front surface. And there's little jars of sugar water up here to make sure that the bees had plenty of food so that if I saw a dance, I would know it was not for a bee collecting nectar. It was a nest site scout dance. Okay, so I had that set up, all the bees labeled. Oh, and just if you have never seen a bee dance on a swarm, it just looks like this. It's out in the open, it's right on top. Most of the swarm bees in the swarm cluster are immobile, like you see below this dancer. And so here we see a dancer, and she's surrounded by nest site scouts, very interested in her dance. They're getting her information. And just a quick review of how a bee indicates the location of a desirable site. Well, this desirable site might be a food source, a patch of flowers, or a nest site. Whichever it is, the dance system works the same way. These flowers are 40 degrees, are to the right of the direction of the sun. Sun direction relative to the bee's home is up here. The direction of the flowers is over here. The flowers are 40 degrees to the right of the direction of the sun. So when the bee does her dance on a comb, if it's a forager, or on the surface of a swarm, if it's a nest site scout, she would do her dance 40 degrees to the right of straight up. That's how they indicate direction. And then the distance to the food source is coded in the duration of the waggle run. The greater the distance, the greater the duration of the waggle run. It's a remarkably straightforward way of communication, but it is very special because there are only two kinds of creatures that have the ability to abstractly indicate the direction and distance to something important. Those two kinds of critters are ourselves, human beings, and honeybees. So that's something that we have a very special relationship to honeybees, communication ability. Now, I want to share with you now this slide, which shows a 16-hour debate of one of the scout bees on one of the swarms that I watched. And I want to go through this debate carefully. It would involve the bees. The scout bees found 11 possible home sites, and there were 149 scouts involved in this decision making. And I want to go through it carefully because if you get this slide, you get my talk. So let's go through. So these are usually 2-hour blocks of time, the patterns of sites being advertised by the scout bees over 2 hours. And you can see from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on the first day, there were a lot of different sites being advertised. And it was a site to the east that was the most popular. Then from 1 to 3 p.m., well, things changed a little bit. That site to the east was still quite popular, but now there's a site to the south and a site to the southwest that are also pretty important, getting advertised pretty strongly. And those two sites, here's 3 to 5 p.m., those two sites to the south and southwest, they just get stronger and stronger. They've gotten stronger, and the other sites are getting weaker. That persists till the end of the day. Those are site B to the south and G to the southwest. They're dominating the dance activity. But by the end of this day, it was really unclear whether it's going to be site B or site G that was going to win the contest. So it was pretty exciting to watch this. Next morning, got up early, set everything up by dawns to be ready. Bees didn't start dancing until a little after 7. But again, it was site B to the south and site G to the southwest that were the most popular among the scout bees. And you can see as the morning unfolded, that site G started to become more and more popular and dominated even site B. And then at the end of the morning, unfortunately, it started raining and everything shut down. But it was clear by the end of that morning that site to the southwest was more popular than the site to the south. And then the next morning, it was nice weather. And every bee that did a dance, every scout bee that did a dance that next morning danced for the site to the southwest. And the swarm lifted off at 11:58. So, like, I think this is building on the way Lindauer very cleverly displayed the dance patterns. And I think it shows so beautifully the way they start out putting lots of options on the table, and then they winnow it down to one, even though they found two very good sites. They're able to sort it out to choose just one. And that agreement was presumably on the best. Now that figure is so important. I want to pause here, and if it's possible if you can pose any questions you might have about what's being shown here, I'd be happy to answer them. But I don't know if that's possible.
I have a quick question.
Trying to call me.
Okay.
Say on your diagram you have site A and site G. Will one be abandoned advertising for site A after it discovers and sees site G for itself, or because I know
Yeah.
you've mentioned reaching a quorum before, but I've never been able to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, the quorum just means a critical level, a sufficient level that tells the bees that they've reached a decision. But to answer your question, were some of these nest site scouts that were favoring site A back at the beginning, would they be in this group at the end? Yes, some of them may well have been. Yeah, the bees can drop out of one site, lose their affinity for one site, and then go on to the swarm surface, follow a dance, and then pick up on what's popular. But they always go out and inspect the site themselves, because they won't dance for site unless they've made a personal inspection of it and have also found that it's a very good site. I'll show some examples of that fluidity of their affiliations coming up. Okay, it sounds like I should just go on to the next part of the talk.
Hang on, Doc, I got a question for you.
Okay.
So, been told for years that swarms know where they're going when they leave the box. Now, some don't do that. They leave the box immediately and they never return. They never go anywhere. So, have they made a decision inside before they took off?
Yes, yeah. Occasionally, it's not typical, but I have seen with my own eyes on this island, which I'm going to talk about, one instance where a colony cast a swarm, and the swarm did not form a cluster nearby. Instead, it made a straight shot to the nest box that they had been exploring. So yes, that can happen. I think it's exceptional, but it certainly does happen. Thank you for asking that question.
I don't have any more questions.
Very good. So I've said that the swarms choose the best site. How do I know that that's true? Well, I didn't know it until I gave the bees a test of their ability to choose among a set of sites. And to do this, I needed to have control. I needed to go to a place where there were no natural nest sites because I wanted to have the bees focus on my experimental nest boxes. And fortunately, Cornell University has a marine laboratory off the coast of southern Maine. If you were in Boston, you'd have to drive north about an hour, then get on a ferry boat and go out to this island, Appledore Island in Maine. It's about 100 acres. And there are no honeybees that are on it. Here's a view of what Appledore Island looks like, looking back to the mainland. Now, the key feature is not only is it isolated, but it has no big trees. The nearest big trees, which would offer potential home sites, are 6 miles away on the mainland. And that's too far away for the scouts to go.
Is one of the answers.
So I
would call the
to
police.
this island,
Yeah, call 911.
and I would set up a swarm on the porch of what was an old former Coast Guard life-saving station. These things used to dot the coasts of the United States. Coast Guardsmen were stationed out here. And there was this one was still there, used by the laboratory, and it had this beautiful little porch. And what I would do is I'd set up my swarm mount on the porch, set up the video camera, and you might guess why I've put up these orange boards here. This is a windy place. So these were wind protection from the swarm. And this swarm with all these wires going into it, some of these, we'll come back to that. Some of those go into were little electronic thermometers. Others, one was a microphone so I could hear the sounds and stuff like that. But I'm not going to talk mostly about that. I'm going to talk mostly about just how they do their dance-offs and how well they test, how well they make their choices. And the way I tested their ability to choose the best site of the various ones they found is I put out 5 nest boxes on this side of the island. Swarm is here. Nest boxes are here, 5 of them. And 4 of them are mediocre. Their size is only about a third the size that they really like. It's about a half a cubic foot. And one of the boxes was 1.5 cubic feet, which is the size they really like. It's about like the size of one deep 10-frame hive body. So that was their choice. It was a multiple choice test for them. And here's what these boxes look like. Each box was in a little shelter, so it wasn't, so it was protected from the wind and much of the sun. And they had a little small entrance, which is what the bees want. But inside, I put a divider inside, and if I took out the divider, the box had a volume of 1.5 cubic feet. If I put the divider here, then it was only half a cubic foot. So that was my way of making a box either really good or not so good. And the question was, do swarms choose the best site? Yes, the answer I found is yes, almost always, 4 times out of 5. And here's an example of what happened when in these experiments. We'd set out the 5 boxes, and then with helpers, I'd keep track of how many nest site scouts were visible buzzing around outside a box every half hour. And you can see these boxes never got much interest, but the big box interest, the number of scouts built up there, and they took off. Same in trial 2, where we've got two of the smaller boxes were found first, and because they don't knew about those, their numbers built up. But then I'm going to mute this a little. There we go. Then once they found the big box, the numbers built up quickly there, and then they just took off and tried to move to the box. So these are almost always, they do in fact choose the best site. And one thing I want to stress, I won't talk about this much later, but much more, but a swarm knows when to make its takeoff once a crowd of 10 to 15 bees had built up outside a box or a home site. They may be also assessing the number of bees inside, but in our experiments, we couldn't look inside the boxes, but we saw consistently if the crowd of scouts was reached 10 to 15 bees outside the box, just buzzing around or walking around, then that somehow that's what we call a quorum. That tells the nest site scouts that that site has proven popular enough to be chosen. I want to make a side note here. These studies did not always go smoothly. And in one case, set up a swarm, and I wanted the bees, of course, to find the nest boxes, but a scout bee found
Don't worry,
an
don't.
attractive site in the other direction, over to this house over here. And this was bad news, folks. This was the house of a gentleman named Rodney Sullivan, a lobster fisherman. He was the only person that lived out on the island here, other than folks at the laboratory, and he liked his privacy. But my bees liked his chimney. My nest site scouts liked his chimney, and they really wanted to go to that place. So I went to the director of the lab and said, you told me not to go over to Rodney Sullivan's place, but I think I need to. And so I went over there, hiked along the edge of the shore, got to his house, and I came up to the house, knocked on the door, explained who I was, explained that I thought my bees were at his house because I actually had seen them flying in and out of his chimney here. And he was some actually happy to see me because he had no idea where these honeybees were coming from. He was freaked out by them. He thought maybe they'd gotten blown out with a storm because there'd been a storm a few days before. And I don't think I actually revealed to him that they were my bees, but I did tell him, well, I can help you with that problem. You got a ladder? Because I got some duct tape and I see got some old window screen here. If you build a little fire in your stove, in your wood stove there, and smoke the bees out, I'll put a screen over the top of your chimney. So I got a ladder. You can actually see it here. Climbed up his roof, and it was actually slippery with seagull poop. And got a screen up on top. Once the bees are out, taped it in place with duct tape. That was good. I did that. It's kind of stuff you do when you're really young and sort of not too worried about taking risks. But it was good. It took away that site, and now the bees consistently focused on the experimental boxes. Those are my scout bees going in there. So what do the individual scout bees do to produce their collective
earphones here?
Get themselves focused on the best
Would I
site?
use them, please?
Well, if we go back to this slide, just to review it, we saw that here they found the winning site. Site G was found 1 o'clock on the first day, but it was only 13% of the bees that were dancing. And remember, every bee in this swarm was labeled for individual identification. So I knew exactly how many bees were dancing for that site at that time block. That number's gradually built up. So it got to 33% of the dancing bees were going for site G. And then on the next day, the 21st, before it rained, it was 62%. And then on the last day, it was 100%. Every scout bee that danced on the swarm was going for that site. So it was very clear that the pattern is that their scouts' interest grows and grows for the best site. And at the same time, the interest is fading for all of the other sites. Even this site B, which was quite competitive. By the end of the debate, nobody was dancing for site B. So they really usually can achieve unanimity. But how do they do it? Well, I'll try to explain it because it's not that tricky, really. This decision process is a race between groups of scouts to accumulate sufficient support. So let's say the simplest situation is you've got two sites. Site A is superb. Site B is okay, but it's just so-so. And you've got some bees that know about site A, and they perform dances for their site. And there's bees over here, scouts that know about this site, and they perform dances for their site. And there's a pool of uncommitted scout bees in the swarm. Now, the bees from site A, they're going to do, as we'll see, very strong dances, very vigorous dances. Whoops. What do we got here, Tom? Sorry. What a minute. The bees from site A, the superb site, they're, as we'll see, they're going to do very vigorous, strong dances to advertise their site. The bees from site B, because it's only so-so, as we'll see, the dances they produce are more feeble than the dances for site A. And so this difference in dance strength means that site A is going to become more popular than site B. It just gets, well, it is more popular at this point, and it just gets more and more popular, and this one loses out in the contest for popularity. So a key feature of this decision-making process is that the strength of a bee's dancing is a function of her site's quality. So support accumulates fastest for the best site. That's not tricky, but it's really a good system. Now, you might be wondering, well, how do the bees adjust dance strength? Well, I'll explain this. It's basically comes down to how many dance circuits they perform when they do a bout of dancing. And I know this because I did another experiment where I set up just 2 nest boxes. One was superb. It was 1.5 cubic feet. The other one was only so-so. It was 0.5 cubic feet. And then I video recorded the dances where the bees were doing dances for both sites side by side. And I measured several variables of their dances. Oh, and incidentally, just to give you a feel for what this looks like, there's the 2 boxes, the fixer-upper, the 0.5 cubic foot box was in this little lean-to shelter, and then the dream home, the 1.5 cubic foot box, was over here with this another lean-to protection, but in another box. And we could count how many bees were going to each of these boxes, were committed to the boxes, because we could capture the bees. A bee would fly into the box, and then one of the helpers would put a little net over the entrance of the box. The scout bee, she'd come out of the box, she'd be caught in the net, and she'd be given a paint mark. And it's kind of an abduction by aliens, so to speak. And that way we could keep track of how many bees were interested in this box and how many bees were interested in this box. Because this was a swarm of unlabeled bees. We had to label the bees at the boxes to keep track of how many were going to each box. And what we found is that the bees going to the dream home, well, the bees that were going to the fixer-upper, they got the yellow dots. They got a dot of yellow on their backs. The bees that went to the dream home got a dot of red paint. And what we saw, because we video recorded the dancing by the bees from the 2 types of boxes, and the dances of bees that were coming from the dream home, well, there were some bees that did a lot of dances. One bee that did more than 300 dance circuits to advertise the box. And others didn't do any, but on average, they did about 93 dance circuits to advertise the dream home box. But on average, you can see what I call the fixer-upper box, which wasn't a great home. On average, they only did 28 dance circuits to advertise that, and most of the bees didn't do any dance circuits. So this really biases the buildup, the growth and popularity in favor of the dream home relative to a fixer-upper. And one thing I want to stress is the nest site scouts don't need to compare sites. They possess an innate sense of home site quality. So it's different from us when we go, if we went house hunting or apartment hunting, we would make personal comparisons. We'd visit all the different sites. The scout bees don't do that. They've got a lot of scout bees, and they don't really need to do that because they can tell just when they get to a site and inspect it carefully, they know whether it's high quality, medium quality, or low quality. So here's my way of summarizing how the better site, let's say it's a choice between 2 sites, one's better, one's poor, how the better site wins out in this popularity contest. And the better site is is here, and I'm going to represent it by these bees dance symbols that are blue colored. The poor site's over here in the red colors dance symbol. And let's say it starts out even Steven. One bee each finds each site. One bee to the better site, one bee to the poor site. Now the the bee that finds the better site, she dances more vigorously, or she performs a longer dance than the bee from the poorer site. So if you came back a couple hours later, several hours later, you'd find more bees visiting the better site than you'd find visiting the poorer site. And the process is just endos. There's a kind of positive feedback in this whole thing. So as more 3 more hours, almost every bee will be dancing on the swarm will be for this site, the better site, and there'll be more bees at the better site. So the bees don't have to compare. All they have to know is they go, they check out a site, they judge its quality, and then they come back and perform a dance whose duration is appropriate for the quality of the site. The better the site, the longer the dance. And then the natural positive feedback means that the best site wins, gets the most popularity. And one of the questions was that we could see that in this kind of experiment, we could see that the winning site had two things happening. One, the numbers of bees at the chosen site were building up, and the number of dancers on the swarm cluster was building up. And we wanted to know, well, what do the scout bees pay attention to? Do they walk around on the swarm and sense, oh, looks like that site over there, that better site over here, has got most of the action. The one that's where the dancers are pointing toward the right, or is it the one? But another possibility is that the scouts sense that this site is winning in the competition because this site over here on the right has more bees, has more scout bees checking it out, visiting it. So I won't go through the details, but we found out that it really is this. What the scout bees pay attention to know whether their site, in this case the one on the right, has won in the competition is which site first develops a critical number of bees at nest site scouts at that site at the same time. And that number is about 30 bees. It's about half of them inside the site, half of them outside. And we call that a quorum. That's just taken from our own parliamentary system. You don't need to have a unanimous group of individuals supporting one of the options. You just have to have enough, i.e. a quorum. And as I mentioned, we found that a quorum is reached when approximately 15 scout bees are visible at the site. In other words, I know that because when we did these experiments, we put out 5 boxes. We would see that once the number of bees at the winning box was consistently about 15, then very soon after that, the swarm would take off and try to fly to that box. That happened here, same thing here. We did 5 trials. This is what happened. Though we don't know how the bees sense a quorum, whether they go to the site and they see lots of bees and they realize, oh, there's a quorum of bees here now, or they go inside and they bump into other bees. We don't know how they sense a quorum. It remains a mystery. So what I've talked about is how the bees' interest grows and grows, like for this site G to the southwest in this case. Their interest grew and grew for that southwest site. But how did the interest fade for all the other sites, including that apparently very good site, but not quite as good site to the south? So how does the interest fade? In other words, why does some scout bees stop dancing? One possible idea was that the scout bees compare sites and switch to better ones. But no, turns out each scout bee visits and so knows about just one site. And we know that because we could keep track with our labeled bees, individually labeled bees, to know which bees had gone to which sites. So no, the bees don't need to compare sites. What they do is they don't need to compare sites. They've got a built-in sense of what is a good site, what's a medium good site, and what's a poor site. And they go to a site, they inspect it, and then they know, okay, my site's really good. I'm going to go back and dance for it strongly, or the bees realizes, no, this is okay, but I'm going to go back and dance for it weakly. And so here's what happens. Let's say you're a bee, you come back from this superb site. The first time you come back to this forum and you advertise it, you're going to do a long dance. It could be a dance with 90 dance circuits into it. And then what you do those 90 dance circuits and you load up with some food, then you go back to the site again to look at it, check it out further. The next time you come back to this forum, on average, you'll only do 75 dance circuits. And the next time, 60 dance circuits. The next time back to this forum, 45 and 30 and 15 and 10 and down to 0. But if you came back from a so-so site, you actually have the same pattern of decay in your dance strength, but you start at a
Breathe
low
in,
point
breathe
of
out.
this line. So you end up producing 30 dance circuits and then 15 dance circuits and then 0 dance circuits. So 45 total. Whereas a bee coming back from this superb site does 315 total. So that's what biases it. That's how the bees really build up most strongly at at a really good site, and how they eventually achieve unanimity, almost unanimity. The inferior alternatives just can't persist in the discussion. It's pretty handy, and it's a pretty smart way to sort things out without and no bee actually ever has to have a synoptic view of the debate. Just each bee follows this decay function. She goes out, she figures out this is good or it's only so-so, and then she sets her pattern of dancing either persistently or briefly. It's a brilliant way of doing it, I think. I'm sure it is. The bees do it. So here I come to the end where I want to summarize what I think are some of the take-home lessons about group or collective decision-making. And because I think these swarms of bees have revealed to us humans ways to achieve collective intelligence. And my point is that with the right organization, groups are remarkably intelligent, often smarter than even the smartest individuals in them. And I know that runs contrary. There's a lot of people, there's terms like groupthink and things like that. And yes, groups don't always make good decisions because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the practices of swarms, of nest site scouts in swarms. That's how we human groups get into trouble. So what is the right organization for having a highly intelligent group? And some groups in human organizations have this. I won't go through the details, but Quaker meetings have this very much like the bees. But here are the things that make for a highly intelligent group. I call these the 5 habits of highly effective groups. Step one, and this can be the hardest one, group members recognize that they have a shared goal. Oftentimes a group doesn't have a shared goal, and that makes it really hard. But sometimes with some thoughtful, people being really thoughtful, they can actually find in one way or another a shared goal. That's step one. Second one, and the bees have a shared goal because they're all together, all in one swarm. Swarm's going to be sink or swim, and they have shared goals to find the best home. Second habit is group members possess diverse information. That is to say, it's really good to have your group members have different backgrounds, different pieces of knowledge, diverse information. And that's exactly what the scout bees have. They go out, they go all across the countryside. They find this tree cavity, that tree cavity, this place in the side of a house, whatever. So they come back and they give their swarm diverse information. And you can see how that's important, because only if you look broadly and get lots of possibilities are you going to be likely to find a really good possibility. So like even when we go house hunting, that's usually what we do. We go explore a lot of different potential homes. Thirdly, group members share their information freely. And this is critical because if somebody's found something good, that information should be shared. Even if somebody's found something only so-so, that information should be shared too, because maybe nobody has found something really good. Fourth thing, and that's what the scout bees do, they share their information freely by performing their dances. The fourth thing is that group members debate strongly and express their judgments, or i.e. vote, independently. This is really important, and we humans are actually really good at this. They weren't really good at this town meeting up in Vermont here, which I took a picture of, because they were doing it voting by show of hands. That doesn't allow you to vote independently. And in these town meetings, if it's a sticky issue, then people can call for a vote by ballot so that nobody gets bent out of shape knowing what how their neighbor voted. So that's voting. It really helps to debate strongly and express votes independently. And then fifth one is the group aggregates its members' judgments in an unbiased way. And we humans are, again, really good at this. We have these systems of one vote per person, majority rule, sometimes quorum sensing. And so these are the 5 things that I learned from the bees. And when I functioned as department chair, I didn't tell my department members that I was using these things, but this is what I did when we had our group discussions. And sometimes the discussions went on for quite a while. It's because we had to work this debate strongly and have people express themselves clearly. But then we voted independently by using paper ballots where people could, it wasn't a show of hands like this at all. It was people could vote what they really thought. Now, that's the end of my talk. And I will do a little advert here. If you're intrigued by this topic, I wrote a whole book on this subject, and the book explains it much better than I've been able to in this talk this evening. So that's the title, Honeybee Democracy. So I think I'm going to stop my share and we can go to questions.
Dr. Seeley, this is Nick, and I really appreciate the talk. I know you muted. Can you hear at this point? I don't know if he turned up his volume.
Jada, you can tell Nick we can hear.
Yeah. Can you hear Nick, Dr. Seeley?
I'm afraid somebody's speaking, but I'm not hearing anything. Oh, I need to turn on my mic to turn this
Yeah, there
up.
he goes.
There you go.
There we go.
Dr. Seeley, can you hear me?
I can hear you right loud and clear.
Very good. Nick Proctor, and really appreciate you taking the time to share about your research. And I've read good portions of the book, and it's great to hear it from you as well directly. For some of your
Thank you, Nick.
research, have you gotten into, I know that you have the fixer-upper home site and the superb home site based on volume. What about the distance from the swarm location? Is there a preferred distance that the bees are looking for?
I don't know. That's a question I never actually addressed. But I would say that if the site is near the swarm, that actually helps it win in the contest a little bit, because it means that bees can go there and come back more quickly. And the whole recruitment process, if it's a good site, can go faster as well.
And thank you. The follow-up to that is that if you have, for hobbyist beekeepers, is that you have maybe 3, maybe 8, maybe 10 hives co-located on the same apiary. Is there I don't know, a competition, or the nest site is too close? If you set out a bait trap too close to your own apiary, that they would prefer going some other distance away?
Definitely. They will, if you want to put your bait hives at least 100 yards out or even farther. And so I just put them in the general area of where I have an apiary. Some are up half a mile, some a quarter mile, some a mile away. Oh, and a little question popped up. I want to answer that now. It said, did Tater make that bee box? I think that is correct. Tater did make that bee box right there in Abingdon. It's a beauty.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll defer to the rest of the group. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions? Okay.
I think you can see I really like these nest site scouts. I think they're fascinating bees. Their behavior is fascinating.
Number one, what what triggers the swarm to leave? Is it they heat up, the excitement? What actually triggers them to leave the swarm and head for the site? Number two, are the bees follow each other by sight or by pheromone? Number three, where is the queen in all that? Is she leading the pack, or how does she get directions?
You've asked questions that are near and dear to me because those are ones I worked on a lot as well. Let's see. What was your first question? We'll take them one at a time.
First question was, what triggers the swarm to leave? The excitement of the dancing of the scout bees,
Yep.
or have to heat up? Do they
Yep.
get their flight whistles? Is there a sound? Is there anything that you can notice that would trigger that?
Yeah. Um, we know a lot about that because it's really an important question. And it turns out they use the same signals to trigger the departure of a swarm from the hive as they use to trigger the liftoff of a swarm from its interim site. So inside a hive, on the morning when a swarm is going to cast a swarm, you've got nest sites. The nest site scouts are running around in there, making the signals that cause everybody to warm up, the piping signals. And then when they can sense that a lot of bees in that hive are good and warm, then they start doing the buzz runs, and that stimulates the swarm to go out. And now a curious thing happens, because if you watch what goes on in an observation, you'll see that pretty near every bee goes out of the hive, and then they do something that's, I don't understand how they do it, but here's what they do. They equilibrate. They start to form a cluster outside the hive, and other bees start going back into this inside the hive. And I think bees, if they go in and they see that there are not many bees in there, then they stay in the hive. The very young bees that can't fly, well, they don't go out. But the queen, the very young bees, they're about the only bees that are in the hive right after a swarm is left. But then more bees come back in and sort of refill the hive. They get the right proportion of goers and stayers. And that's triggered by those two signals. The piping signal to tell other bees to warm up and get ready to fly, and then the buzz run signal to tell them to actually get going. And what was you had another question. I forgot what it was.
Second question was, are they following by sight, or are they following by pheromone? Follow the swarm.
All right. How do they organize the flight to the new site? Great question. We worked for a couple of years on that. It's mostly by sight. In fact, you can seal up, but the Nasanov gland pheromone does play a role. They don't steer a swarm using an odor cloud, but they do it by the knowledgeable bees in the airborne swarm point the way to go, which direction to go, by streaking right over the top of the swarm, so that the bees below can look up and see those streakers. We call those streaking flights, streaker bees. And they get the bees to get going in the right direction. It starts out slowly, but these are the nest site scouts. These nest site scouts are so resourceful, so skilled. They get the bees going in the right direction. The swarm cloud gradually accelerates. It finally reaches a terminal velocity of about 6 miles an hour. And then when it gets about 100 yards from the new home site, something mysterious happens. Something I don't understand happens. They're able to put the brakes on this thing. So that swarm cloud slows down, gets slower, moves slower and slower and slower, and then it stops right in front of the new home site. It could be a bait hive, it could be a knot hole in a tree. And then what do the nest site scouts do? Then they drop out of the cloud, they stand at the entrance, and they release the Nasanov gland scent, the attraction pheromone scent, to beat the band by fanning their wings. And so the scout bees finally pinpoint the site that the swarm needs to move into. Usually the queen's usually not among the first bees in, but she finds her way in eventually too.
That's
So
where she would be at in the swarm, if she's in the middle of it, leading the pack, or towards the backside.
yeah, it's hard to say. We haven't been able to really get good information about where she is in the swarm, but my hunch is that she's smart enough to stay in the middle. And so she doesn't get separated from the others. That's just a hunch, though. Someday somebody will get the right tracking device and we'll figure that out. Shouldn't be too terribly hard.
We have another question.
Good.
Just with like the ideal home, is there anything besides just the size of it that they look at when considering a new home?
Thanks for that's a very useful question to ask, because there are at least 7 things that a scout bee pays attention to assess the home site. One is the one I talked a lot about, the size of the cavity. Another one that's very important, maybe the most important, has to do with the entrance. It's the entrance opening size. They only want that entrance to be about 2 to 3 square inches in area, and they really want that entrance high off the ground. That a small entrance high off the ground is probably the most important trait of a future nest site that they have. But there are a couple of other things that matter to the bees. If the site has some combs by a previous colony, that makes it very, very attractive as well. There's a couple more things, but they escape my memory right now. But all of these things are really useful. If you go to my website, I think I've got posted there a PDF of a paper called Bait Hives for Honeybees. And that, or you could look it up in this Honeybee Democracy book. That lists the features of what makes an ideal bait hive. Oh, and putting some, yeah, the Nasinoth gland. I also put in the Nasinoth gland scent, those little scent vials that the bee supply manufactures. I put those in my bait hives too. I don't think they make the bait hive more attractive, but they make it more noticeable. They make a bait hive much more likely for a nest site scout to bump into, to stumble upon. So those things I very much recommend. I've done experiments where I put up 2 boxes, one with the scent, one without, and they're otherwise all equal. And the one that has the scent gets found fastest, and the interest builds up there for sure the fastest as well. Good, that's an important question. And I like that question a lot, because it shows that what we learn about the basic biology of honeybees is actually also pretty useful information.
Dr. Seeley, my son is on Zoom in Florida, and he said your book is out of stock on Amazon.
Oh, yeah. Is it the new book that's out of stock, or Honeybee Democracy? I wonder which one.
What he said.
Oh, okay. Well, he could order it. He could go to Princeton University Press. I know they keep a stock of it, but yeah, that's interesting. Amazon's usually pretty good at keeping a supply of them. So the backup would be, there's a number of bee supply. There's another one. It's a company up in New York State called Better Bee. I'm pretty sure they stock the book, as well as, of course, the publisher itself, Princeton University Press.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for your interest. Your son's interest. Or your interest.
Dr. Seeley, when they're locating in the tree, do they normally always face the south? Like we are always told to kind of position them to the sun exposure, or do you find openings on all sides of the tree?
Well, I do find openings on all sides of the trees, because I know about a lot of trees, but most of them, the vast majority, are facing south. And I think, at least, I don't know why that is where you are, but up north here, it makes a big difference in the winter. It means they can get out on their cleansing flights. And it probably also means, wherever you are, that the bees can start their day earlier with some sunlight shining on the entrance, if it's a cool morning, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah. But isn't it remarkable that a little worker bee can go out and inspect a site and keep track of and assess so many properties of the site, like the size of the entrance and the direction of the entrance and the height of the direction and the size of the cavity and whether there's combs in the cavity, and it's probably still some other things. Oh, whether there's resin on the walls in the cavity. That also makes the site attractive. I just, as I say, these, when we work with our honeybees, it, it's really, I think it's good to admire them for just, these guys are the brainiest of the insects in the whole world. Uh, So, and you can tell it when you look, next time you look at the head of a worker bee, just look at how big that head is. And another interesting comparison is to compare the size of the head of a worker bee to that of a queen bee. A queen has a small head because she has a very simple behavior. A worker bee has just the neurobiologists that I know that study the worker bee's brain, they just throw up their hands at it and in marvel at its complexity and size relative to the body. In fact, in a worker bee, the brain relative to the rest of the body is just like what it is for us. You know, it's about a 60-to-1 ratio of brain mass to body mass. Same for bees and same for us. We're brainy and they're brainy.
Dr. Seeley, going back to the 7 traits that you just mentioned about what a
Yeah.
nest box they would look at, it was announced last week or publicized last week that Premier Bee Company, they were putting out a new beehive with the interior surface being rough sawn or not smooth wood. Have you done any research when you put a smooth box out versus a rough sawn interior box out that the bees would prefer one over the other?
I haven't done that. I haven't done that. No. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Certainly the rough sawn does stimulate the application of propolis, which is the propolis envelope that they build. So that might be why the bees are more attracted to that site. It's probably, and it may feel a lot more natural to them. Planed lumber does not exist in the wild.
That better our beekeeping today, the podcast, they've talked about using rough sawn because of the increased surface area for propolis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it my hunch though is that what's even more important about that is it provides the right stimulus for propolis collection. I think the bees yeah. It's a more natural situation for the bees too.
Dr. Seeley, in the study that you showed us on the island there, you had 5 boxes.
Mhm.
How many sites on average is a swarm going to visit before it begins making a decision?
Oh, that's all I can say is, yeah, in that experiment, I used 5 boxes just because I wanted it to be a good multiple choice test for them. There wasn't just one or the other. But I know from watching the dances on swarms that I think the average is about a dozen different potential home sites are announced by waggle dances on average. Sometimes it's only a handful, sometimes it's only a half a dozen, sometimes it's more. But I think the average is about a dozen potential sites. And still and when you think about it, that's pretty impressive because trying to sort out 12 different options, I would struggle with that. You go to a car dealer, for example, and you find, I don't know, if you find 4 cars that are equally attractive, then it's hard to choose. But anyhow, yeah.
Yeah, along those lines, is that why there's a time difference in sometimes a swarm will stay in a tree or on a branch for one afternoon, sometimes it'll be there the next day?
Yeah, I think you've put your finger on it because for them to do a really quick, to spend only a little time on a tree branch, well, they've either had the skill to start the decision making even before the swarm has left the hive, its home, or they had the good fortune of a scout bee finding an excellent nest site right at the get-go, and thus the whole process very quickly built up in favor of that really good site. That good site not only was it a good site, but it had a head start.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. These are really I find these are really questions I can tell you guys are thinking a lot about what it's like to be a swarm or a scout bee.
Do we
I
have
have a,
any,
I have a quick question. On more than one occasion, I've had a swarm leave the hive and stay actually on the hive itself, like attached to the top cover or on the side of the hive. Is there any rhyme or reason to that, or is that, just nothing really to look into?
Did Jeremy, did that when you saw that, was that a temporary clustering of bees on the hive, or did they hang out on the hive for an extended time?
It was the initial swarm.
My guess is that for whatever reason, the queen hadn't come out. She hadn't, and I don't know why she wouldn't, but she might, she might not be a strong flyer. She might be old, might have her wings frayed. My guess is, because they will go out, the workers will stream out, but unless the queen joins them, the cluster that they form is unstable and they go home.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yeah, I can-
maybe as a follow-up to that, and I want to say that it was out of your honeybee democracy book, it was a split decision with the swarm. Is that the swarm cast, but then it split in the air. Could you talk a little bit about that situation? If maybe I'm getting my wires crossed, but anyways.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what happened there. Uh, oh yeah, it was a swarm. Yeah, yeah, thank you for asking this question. It was a swarm where the scouts found two very good future home sites at the same time. And so both groups grew large, and this and they both were stimulated. They both sensed, oh, a quorum has been reached at my site, but they didn't know that there was another site where a quorum had also been reached. So both groups of scout bees came back, started making the piping signals and the buzz runs to get everybody to launch into flight. And the swarm took off, but then it split in air into two groups. And this was on Appledore Island. And one group flew down one group flew to the east, the other group flew to the southeast. And I was wondering what's going to happen now. And and I was wondering, well, what's going on with the queen? And then both groups came back because I found the queen. The queen had not flown away. Something was wrong with her, apparently. I found her on the floor of the porch where the swarm had been set up. So I put her in a queen cage, put her on that swarm mount, and then both groups of swarms came back and clustered her. Both swarms came back and clustered around her. It was a very, it was a, so that's what would happen in nature if the queen doesn't go with either swarm. Uh, what would happen if the queen had gone with one of the groups and the other did not have this queen? That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure what would happen. I think the bees that didn't have the queen probably would have figured out where the queen was and joined the cloud of bees that did have the queen. That would be my guess.
Yeah, or I suppose they could have returned to their home site just because they were oriented. If they were too far apart separately, then they could have
Right.
returned back to their base camp, and then they would still be queenless at that point, although there might be brood that they could have figured things out. But yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. My guess is that's probably what they would have done, gone back to the home base and um, rebuilt that colony. And because there is going to be a new queen in that colony. If it's a swarming colony, there are swarm cells in there. And often, you may have seen this yourself. Sometimes a swarm has been delayed by bad weather, and by the time this weather's gotten good enough for the colony to cast a swarm, that queen is about to emerge. And the workers have some control over that. Because if a queen starts chewing open her queen cell, they can seal it up with wax and keep her inside her cell until the first swarm has gone out. But yeah, it gets a little tricky on when you with swarms if the weather goes foul on them. The timing of things can get messed up.
That's another metric of awe, I think, that you were talking about earlier. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's that ability, those worker bees, to be sensitive to the situation and respond accordingly.
Dr. Seeley,
We
you
would, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
I was just gonna say, occasionally you will hear or read about a mother-daughter queen situation in the hive. If a swarm is to occur, typically do they both go, and can they split at that point, one go in each direction, or do they all, the two queens stay together?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I've never, because I don't have haven't seen that situation. My hunch would be that most of the bees, they're going to go with the mother queen because she produces lots of the queen pheromone, this 9-oxo-2-decanoic acid, whereas a virgin queen, she produces some, enough so when she goes to a mating area, she attracts drones, but it's not as much as the mature queen. So my guess is they might split up. They might split up. Two groups of.
I heard tell me my son just texted me, but he said he found his book at Target.
Did you hear that, Dr. Seeley, that the
No,
book is down at
I missed that one.
Target?
Sounded good though.
We have any other questions?
We have done, as a follow-up to those last questions, we've done experiments where we have let swarms take off, and in some cases we keep the queen caged, and sometimes we don't. And we know where the swarm wants to go because we're doing it in a big field near my lab where we put out a good bait hive. And so what happens with the swarm, if the queen is released, of course, the swarm flies straight to the box. If the queen is not released, what we see happens is the swarm takes off, starts flying away, and then it disperses. It's like the bees are searching for the queen, and eventually somebody finds the queen is still back on the cross where the swarm was mounted, and then they reassemble around her. So I think in nature that situation can arise where the queen is just not a strong flyer and they miss her, but then they go and find her and gather around her. It's again part of just the flexibility and resourcefulness of worker honeybees that I think we all find so admirable. Well, I don't know if we're done with the questions, but this has been probably the best Q&A session I've ever experienced. So my hat's off to you folks.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciated having you, and you've given us all a lot to think about.
Good. I'm glad. And I thank you guys again for that beautiful little bee hunting box. It's the most beautiful one I've ever seen, and I'm still enjoying the honey that you sent along with it. So thank you. It's been my pleasure to work with you, and I hope our paths will cross again.
You're quite welcome. Bye-bye. So, are we off now?